Hey guys, tonight we trudge across windswept deserts, tiptoe through bandit-infested mountain passes, and dip our blistered feet in muddy caravanserai pools, all in the name of fashion. Picture this: you're wrapped in bolts of glowing silk that catch the light just right. Except there's a sandstorm pelting your face and your camel just sneezed on your last fig. Still glamorous, not quite. But the Silk Road was never just about silk. It was about the stories stitched into every thread. You're not exactly in a five-star situation. The wind howls louder than your last relationship argument, and your only shelter is a goat hide tent that smells faintly of regret. But you're part of something enormous. This is the artery of ancient global exchange, pulsing with perfumes, spices, glass beads, and, of course, textiles that would eventually reshape wardrobes from Beijing to Birmingham. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing just outside Xi'an, when it was called Chang'an, China's imperial capital, and the birthplace of this serpentine artery through space and time. Before the road was ever named, the silk was already legendary. By 100 BCE, the Han dynasty was sending envoys westward, not with war in mind, but with glimmering bolts of silk in hand. These weren't your average fabrics. These were gossamer thin, impossibly smooth, and dyed in hues that looked like they belonged in the wings of a celestial dragonfly. The road itself isn't one road. It's dozens of trails crisscrossing deserts, river valleys, and mountain passes. It's like trying to follow spaghetti across a plate the size of a continent. And you're one of thousands of traders, nomads, monks, and maybe the occasional runaway prince. Each of you lugging bundles of fabric swaddled in protective oilcloth. One mainstream historical fact: the Silk Road officially got its name only in the 19th century, coined by a German geographer named Ferdinand von Richthofen. Yeah, it took a guy with a castle-sounding last name to brand something that had already changed the world for centuries. But long before marketing caught up, you're trudging through the Taklamakan Desert, ominously nicknamed "You Go In. You Don't Come Out." To be fair, that's not great for morale, but along this route, oases gleam like mirages. Hotan, Dunhuang, Samarkand, they glitter with tiles, dates, and traders haggling over fabric weights like they're arguing religion. You're probably wondering, was silk really that big a deal? Let's just say it was the ancient equivalent of blue check marks and limited edition sneakers. Everyone who was anyone wore it. And those who couldn't. Well, they tried to fake it. You'll soon see knockoff silk show up in places like Persia and Egypt, where local weavers attempted to imitate the Chinese style. Most didn't quite stick the landing. But hey, points for effort. As you journey farther west, the dangers multiply. Bandits hide in rocky gullies. Scorpions sneak into your boots. And the occasional Imperial Customs officer wants to inspect your cargo, which is code for shaking you down for taxes, or worse, compliments. You overhear stories in dusty inns, flickering with oil lamps. A merchant claims his cousin once traded a single bolt of silk for a herd of horses. Another swears he saw the Emperor of Rome wearing a Chinese robe so sheer it caused a political scandal. Historians still argue whether those particular robes were ever officially banned in Rome or just became scandalous through gossip. What we do know is that Chinese silk had become an elite obsession across the Eurasian continent, long before most Romans even knew where China was. You share a bowl of lamb stew with a Sogdian merchant. Sogdians, by the way, are the ancient MVPs of Silk Road commerce, fluent in a buffet of languages and slicker than any modern influencer. They're the reason these goods moved so fluidly across such hostile terrain. The merchant hands you a tiny embroidered pouch, whispering, "See this pattern? It's a Persian motif woven by a Chinese girl in Dunhuang." Your fingers trace the tiny threads. The colors are still vivid, centuries before color fast dyes. Later, you shuffle into a yurt outside Kashgar, where an old woman unrolls a bolt of silk dyed with crushed insects. It shimmers deep red, like wine under torchlight. She tells you about the secret recipes, the combinations of herbs, minerals, and yes, insect goo that went into achieving those eye-popping hues. One fringe tidbit silk wasn't just worn, it was eaten. Sort of. Some Tang Dynasty medicinal texts suggest boiling down worn-out silks into healing brews. Was it effective? Doubtful. But you know how people are if it's expensive. Someone will try to drink it. The nights are cold in the desert. Your sleeping mat is lumpy. Your camel snores. But when you look up, the stars stretch out in a quilt of light. You realize that somewhere, in some villa in Rome, a noblewoman is wearing a dress sewn from the same bolt of silk. You're transporting centuries before fast fashion was a thing. And still, the silk story is only beginning. You wake up with your face stuck to a saddlebag. The camel, blessedly, has stopped snoring. Outside the yurt, the early desert wind is stirring dry, gritty but not yet cruel. As you step out, your legs ache from days of riding, walking, arguing over thread counts, and dodging sandstorms that sneak in sideways like office gossip. You stretch, yawn, and remember today you're heading toward the cities of Ferghana, where things get stylish in an entirely accidental way. No one along the Silk Road ever said, "Let's start a global fashion movement." Honestly, they were just trying to not starve. But fashion has a funny way of hitching a ride on whatever wagon's heading out. You make your way through a narrow ravine where the only decoration is bird poop and nervous laughter. But once you crest the hill, you spot the valley ahead, lush, blooming, and dotted with tents, markets, and stalls flapping in the wind like party banners. Ferghana, where the horses are legendary and the garments are starting to evolve from survival wear into something people might actually choose to be seen in. Here, a mainstream historical fact. The Ferghana Valley was famous not just for its horses, which the Chinese called heavenly horses, but also for the early mingling of textile traditions between East and West. Chinese silk met Iranian dyes. Steppe embroidery kissed Han Dynasty minimalism. It was a chaotic date night for ancient fashion sensibilities. You duck into a market stall where rows of fabric shimmer like a field of exotic flowers. There's silk dyed with saffron, linen woven with golden thread, and something scratchy you hope isn't camel fur. A merchant unrolls a bolt of chartreuse fabric. You flinch. It's from Khotan, he insists, as if geography makes up for taste. Just a few paces down, someone's selling coats made of quilted silk and wool layers. Quilted, functional and decorative, now we're talking. You tug at one and almost buy it before realizing you have 2 silvers to your name and a long way to go. At a shaded tea stall, you overhear a hilarious debate between 2 merchants about hemline lengths. One swears shorter tunics are better for mountain travel. The other insists longer robes attract more respect, or at least make you look richer. He smirks. You sip your tea and think. This is basically ancient fashion TikTok. Fringe tidbit. The earliest shopping malls may have started along these routes, long rows of stalls, organized by product type, often guarded by local officials who doubled as fashion critics. If your robe was too sheer or your embroidery too Persian, they'd definitely notice and probably tax you extra. You get back on your camel, let's call him Mustache, for his impressive lip fuzz and continue west. Along the way, you pass artisans carving wooden looms into portable kits. Textile tools are being traded now. 2, not just finished garments. That means more people can make the look at home. And that's how fashion truly spreads. Not just by royalty showing off, but by tools, dyes, skills, portable culture, tucked into saddlebags, whispered across borders, traded in chunks of obsidian or ounces of salt. You stop at a caravanserai before dusk, where the walls are painted with murals showing travelers in every kind of garb, Mongol coats, Indian turbans, Persian slippers. You count at least 10 different sleeve styles and 0 consistent waistlines. It's a mess. It's beautiful. A woman in a long robe embroidered with birds sits beside you near the fire. She spins yarn from dyed silk while humming an Armenian lullaby. Birds are always in, she tells you casually. Even when they're not. You nod solemnly like that means something. Because honestly, it might. Historians still argue whether Central Asian artisans influenced Chinese fashion more than the other way around. The truth, as always, is probably tangled up like a ball of yarn after a camel steps on it. What's certain is that Ferghana, Samarkand, Bactria, these were not just stops on the road. They were style labs. Experimental zones where sleeves got wider, collars got higher, and someone somewhere said, let's dye it blue and see what happens. As the fire dies down, you notice Mustache chewing on your boot. You sigh, consider your options, and realize even with sand in your socks, you're walking through history and every dusty trail you follow leaves behind just a bit more sparkle than before. Tomorrow, the road will twist toward the west, and the Romans are about to lose their minds over transparent robes. But tonight, you bundle up in that weird but warm camel wool blanket, watch the stars blink into life, and drift off to the gentle murmurs of fashion merchants arguing over pleats. By morning, the air smells faintly of cardamom, old leather, and someone's suspicious breakfast stew. You mount Mustache again, who grunts his disapproval, and head westward toward the high plateaus of Central Asia. The terrain shifts beneath you, dunes flatten into grassy steppe, and ahead, you glimpse the scattered domes of trading towns ringed with mud walls and grapevines. This is the stretch where fashion walks on hooves. Horses rule the conversation here, and honestly, your silk bolts may as well be paperweights if you don't have a good steed to carry them. Ferghana horses, sleek and strong, were once the stuff of myth. The Han dynasty even waged campaigns just to get their hands on them. Something historians now call the War of the Heavenly Horses. Yes, silk may have been soft, but it sparked some very sharp military campaigns. Still, as you pass a rest stop where merchants are watering their animals and adjusting saddlebags, the conversation isn't about horses today, it's about tunics. Specifically, how long should they be? Too short and you look like a servant. Too long and you trip while peeing behind a bush. Somewhere in between lies glory. You lean into a merchant's chat about fabric layering. Double tunic in summer, he says, holding out a cotton underrobe and a sheer silk overgarment dyed pale lavender. The look is opulence. The feel is breeze. He winks. You're not entirely sure he's joking. You touch a piece of fabric with tight spiral embroidery turquoise silk threaded with copper wire. It's warm to the touch and surprisingly heavy. Macedonian influence, the vendor claims. Or maybe Persian? Historians argue. Of course they do. That's basically their job description. Fringe tidbit. The Scythians' nomadic warriors from the steppes wore colorful, elaborately patterned trousers centuries before the Roman world caught on. These weren't afterthoughts. They were fierce, comfortable fashion statements long before your favorite yoga pants were a thing. Some were even quilted for winter insulation looking at you. Paris Fashion Week 2025. You ride onward through the open plains, where caravan processions look like ant trails against the horizon. Puffs of dust mark where wagons roll. Strings of camels sway under towering piles of textiles. And everywhere, there's color. Bright stripes, elaborate florals, and checks so bold they could double as flags. You dismount for lunch near a crossroads market that smells of roasting onions and fresh woven wool. A Turkmen herder is showing off his hand-dyed robes, featuring stylized rams and lightning bolts. His neighbor, a Bukharan merchant, scoffs and unfurls a softer design, delicate vines trailing over sky-blue fabric. See, he says smugly, elegance doesn't shout. His robe is so airy. A good gust might carry it off into legend. You snack on flatbread and goat cheese while pretending not to listen to the two of them argue. This is Central Asia's version of a fashion show, a slow-motion runway where every robe, belt, and boot has been tested by wind, weather, and wildly different aesthetics. At sunset, a Kazakh rider trots by wearing a cloak that looks suspiciously Mongol in origin, dark blue felt with crimson trim. You admire the heavy seams and the oddly modern-looking belt. Trade gift, he says. Some guy from east of the Altai. Smelled like pine needles and yak. Historians still argue whether Mongol clothing influenced Central Asian dress early on, or only after Genghis Khan's rise centuries later. There's embroidered evidence pointing both ways, but what's clear is that regional fashion had range. The same community might wear silk, wool, and animal skins depending on the occasion or the climate or the argument they were trying to win that day. You spend the night under a felt tent, bundled up in a borrowed quilt that smells like both comfort and old tea. You fall asleep listening to distant flutes, camel bells, and one very loud merchant shouting about someone stealing his sash. Typical. In the morning, you'll cross into territories that once traded with Roman agents. And friend. The Romans have opinions especially about see-through clothing. But that's for tomorrow. Tonight, the wind hums through the grass like a lullaby, and the stars look down on your well-worn boots and half-dreamt dreams of tunics. Boots and horsehair trim. You wake up to the sound of someone shouting. Shear again. It's indecent, which is not exactly how most people like to start their day. But hey, welcome to the Roman Empire. You've crossed into territory where silk isn't just a fabric anymore, it's a full-blown scandal. Your sandals crunch along the gravel paths outside a bustling Roman villa. You're in the eastern fringes of the empire, where traders from the Parthian and later Sasanian empires bring bolts of silk that have traveled 1,000 miles to scandalize senators and inflame fashion tastes. The story goes like this: the first time Romans laid eyes on Chinese silk glimmering, impossibly fine, and light as cobwebs, they lost what little fashion restraint they had left. Suddenly, the togas weren't enough. Enter the era of translucent robes. Mainstream historical fact. Roman writers like Seneca and Pliny were absolutely appalled. Seneca complained about Roman matrons being clothed in nothing, thanks to the popularity of sheer silk. Pliny the Elder called it a drain on Roman morals and Roman coin purses. Naturally, it only made silk more desirable. You stroll through a Roman marketplace where bolts of imported silk hang like forbidden fruit. Some are dyed imperial purple, reserved for elites and, officially, for emperors. Others shimmer in gold and silver threads, whispering rumors of their origins in faraway lands like Serica, the Roman name for China, which they imagined as a place made entirely of silk. The merchant at the stall has an accent you can't quite place. This one, he says, holding up a gossamer thin blue fabric. This one caused a divorce. You raise an eyebrow. She wore it to a senator's feast. The wife of the host was not pleased. You run your fingers across the material, it's so fine. It's almost unreal, like holding smoke. And that was the issue. In a society obsessed with virtue and order, wearing something that made you look like a ghost or worse, a scandalous one was pushing the fashion envelope just a bit too far. Fringe tidbit. Some Roman women, in an effort to balance modesty and silkiness, layered their sheer robes over tightly woven undergarments painted to match their skin tone. The effect still pretty shocking, but technically covered. Kind of. Historians still argue whether silk ever became widely accessible to the average Roman, or remained the domain of the elite. Some argue that cheaper blends, often mixed with linen or cotton, circulated among the merchant classes. Others believe silk remained a conspicuous status symbol. Either way, people got creative. Sericum Latin for silk showed up in everything from veils to tablecloths to, reportedly, coffin linings. Because why not be buried in scandal? You stroll past a tailor's workshop where a mannequin made of reeds and wax is being draped with silk and fitted with a gold-threaded belt. The tailor hums to himself, clearly proud of the ensemble. For a senator's mistress, he says, she wants to wear it to church. You don't ask which god. As you turn a corner into the wealthier part of the city, you see an older Roman man scolding his daughter, who is twirling in a green silk wrap. You'll bring shame on this house, he mutters. We are not Parthians. She just laughs and spins again, the fabric rippling like water. You wonder if he realizes that much of the silk she's wearing was dyed and finished in Parthia before being passed along to Roman traders. The irony delicious. Down by the port, crates of goods are being offloaded: spices, oils, lapis lazuli, and yes, more silk. You hear one dock worker joke? This one's probably cursed. Last time we opened a crate from that trader, Marcus fell in love with the scarf. You find a quiet corner near a bathhouse and sit. the scent of heated olive oil and wet marble in the air. A Roman soldier, his tunic stained with dust and sweat, sits beside you and nods. Got a sister in Alexandria. He says, sells silk scraps to dancers. You glance over. What kind of dancers, he grins. The kind the Senate doesn't invite to parties. Officially, as the sun sets, the villa windows glow orange, and shadows stretch across the tiled streets. You feel it again, that odd tension between old-world conservatism and the wildfire of new ideas, new textures, new desires. The Silk Road didn't just carry goods, it carried confusion. It carried longing. It carried, frankly, drama. And Rome leaned into every inch of it. You rest under a vine-covered terrace as music drifts from a nearby feast. You hear the clink of goblets, the rustle of silk, and the occasional giggle. Somewhere in that villa, someone's robe is just see-through enough to start a fight tomorrow. And you smile. You're not here to judge. You're just following the thread. You leave behind the marble columns and scandalous drapery of Rome's eastern provinces with a mix of amusement and mild second-hand embarrassment. The air grows cooler as you ascend a low range of dusty hills, your saddle creaking and the scent of cumin clinging to your scarf. Your next destination isn't a grand city or a royal court. It's somewhere far more powerful in its own peculiar way. A roadside inn where everyone knows the hemline trends 3 weeks before they reach the capital. Welcome to the caravanserai gossip circuit, where the real fashion intel circulates not in scrolls or decrees, but in murmurs over stew bowls and gossip traded for lentils. You dismount at a squat building of sun-bleached stone and slip into the courtyard, where travelers from half a dozen kingdoms are unpacking both goods and secrets. Mainstream historical fact: caravanserais were critical to the functioning of the Silk Road. More than just rest stops, they were hubs of information, places where news and rumors traveled faster than any horse or merchant. Think of them as ancient Wi-Fi zones with goats. Inside, you sit beside a barrel-chested man with earrings shaped like tiny lions. He's dabbing oil on a new pair of Persian slippers. Bukhara's selling boots now. He grumbles. Hand-stitched, but the stitching's crooked. It's the trend, apparently. He scoffs, then pulls out a sash dyed in concentric circles of indigo and saffron. But this'll make the Mongols cry. You nod as if you understand fully what that means. Nearby, a young woman from the Sogdian valleys flips through a sample book of embroidery patterns, each tiny square a different regional motif. She explains without you even asking that certain floral designs are now banned in some towns due to their resemblance to imperial seals. Too political. She sighs. Can't even wear flowers anymore. Fringe tidbit fashion embargoes were real. Certain rulers along the route tried to limit what could be worn, especially if it mimicked royal attire. In one odd case, a city in Transoxiana banned green silks after a governor's wife had a meltdown over someone copying her outfit at a festival. Over a bowl of lentil porridge, surprisingly spicy, you hear about a caravan from Samarkand that brought back silk, dyed with ground beetles an alarming but stunning shade of red. 2 bolts caused a bidding war in Nishapur. One merchant claims, the loser's camel bit the winner. Very dramatic. Historians still argue whether these stops were truly cosmopolitan hubs or just glorified truck stops with slightly better snacks. But you're here, listening to 4 languages bounce around the stone walls, watching a Kashmiri trader teach a Turkish dye merchant how to tie a double-knot sash. One look around and the answer feels obvious. This is where trends are born. Not sown, but spoken into existence. You watch as a weary merchant unwraps a headscarf stiff with desert dust. It's patterned with diamond shapes edged in tiny pearls. Someone gasps. A crowd gathers. Is that the one from Khotan? A voice asks. The one with the prayer knots. Another mutters. No, it's the newer one. You can tell by the fringe. You didn't realize fringe was such a sensitive topic. But here we are. As the sun sets, travelers gather by the central fire. A bard sings a song about a weaver who fell in love with a noblewoman. Through the fabric she made him, each thread a secret message. Each pattern a stolen glance. The song ends with the nobleman being strangled by his jealous brother using the same scarf. You clap politely. You chat with an elderly man who swears he once carried a bolt of silk that changed color depending on the weather. It turned blue in rain, he insists. Sold it to a vizier, wore it once and fainted from excitement. You're not sure if he's telling the truth, but you kind of hope he is. Someone else describes flying fabric from India so light it floats in the breeze like mist. Another trader boasts of buying a Persian robe so dazzling, I didn't even need to bribe the guards, they bowed instead. By now, you're half convinced the best silks are magical. The worst ones are cursed, and every fifth merchant is lying just enough to make the truth more interesting. Later, as you lie on a straw pallet under a thick cotton blanket, you overhear two traders arguing softly over the stitching pattern used in a robe spotted in mauve. One swears it was a cloud collar motif, a rare design used only by Chinese nobility. The other insists it was just a coffee stain. In the quiet, you smile to yourself. Here in the humblest of places, no palace, no emperor. Just calloused hands and tired feet fashion lives and breathes through words, through knowing looks, through shared stories in the flicker of torchlight. And tomorrow, you follow those rumors further east, where the Tang dynasty is about to show you how a capital city becomes a catwalk. You leave the caravanserai at dawn, dust clinging to your sleeves, head still buzzing from last night's embroidery debates and that wildly specific insult about someone's off-center collar pleat. The road bends toward China again, not toward the Great Wall or distant provinces, but straight into the flamboyant beating heart of the Tang dynasty, the city of Chang'an. If the Silk Road were a circulatory system, Chang'an would be its fashion-forward heart, pulsing with color, perfume, politics, and peacock feathers. You arrive as the sun slides down behind the tiled roofs, and the city lights up not with lamps, but with silks. The streets are drenched in color gold, crimson, celadon, turquoise, every shade you didn't know existed until now. Mainstream historical fact. During the Tang dynasty, 6th to 18th, 907 CE, Chang'an was one of the most cosmopolitan cities on Earth. Home to traders, poets, monks, ambassadors, dancers, and more importantly for your purposes, some truly excessive fashion choices. Tang elite fashion blended Chinese traditions with Persian, Indian, Turkic, and even Sogdian influences an Instagram feed of ancient fusion couture. You walk through a busy shopping district where mannequins okay. Dressed bamboo poles wear full-length, open-sleeved robes that trail like river silk. Women strut in rukun high-waisted skirts paired with low-cut, long-sleeved jackets and veils with embroidered moons. One woman walks by with two attendants just to keep her hemline from dragging. It's dramatic. It's impractical. It's glorious. A vendor tries to sell you a belt made entirely of dyed yak hair. New style, he insists. Bard said it's lucky. You politely decline and move on to a perfume stall where someone's bottling rosewater in vials shaped like dragon claws. It smells like divinity, with a hint of cinnamon. As you browse, a street performer dances in a robe that fans out like butterfly wings, embroidered with gold thread and tiny beads of lapis lazuli. The crowd applauds, not just for the dance, but for the fabric rumored to be a recent import from Samarkand, stitched with a needle soaked in wine for good luck. Is that true? Probably not. Do you want it to be absolutely? Fringe tidbit. The Tang elite sometimes powdered their clothing with crushed mica for added sparkle. That's right. People were walking around in outfits that literally glittered in the sun over 1,000 years before your favorite K-pop stage look. You duck into a tea house where poets recline beside diplomats and fashionable nobles who seem to spend half their lives composing verses and the other half deciding which fan goes with which robe. One man has a peacock feather in his hat, but his friend laughs and pulls out a parrot feather instead. Imported from Java, he says smugly. Historians still argue whether this level of cultural blending diluted traditional Chinese styles or elevated them. Some scholars call it aesthetic imperialism. Others argue it was the pinnacle of textile cross-pollination. Meanwhile, the woman next to you is dyeing her fingernails with crushed berries and doesn't seem too worried about it either way. Later, you tour the weaving quarter, where looms clatter like drums. Here, silk isn't just imported, it's designed. Local artisans experiment with repeating motifs, dancing cranes, cloud swirls, vines bearing imaginary fruits. The color palettes are audacious peach next to jade, silver over burnt umber, and more than one robe dyed an alarming shade of chartreuse that somehow works. You watch one weaver pull a shimmering bolt from the frame and smile. Persian twist on a Han design, he says. Took 3 weeks. Almost worth my eyesight. You ask who it's for. A general's mistress, he grins. Probably wear it once, then give it to her maid. You wander further into a temple garden where monks are chanting. Even here, fashion creeps in. One monk wears a prayer robe with embroidered lotuses, so vivid they practically glow. Gift from a student, he murmurs. She insisted. He shrugs like this is just something that happens. In the noble quarter, you spot the real fashion leaders. A young court official wears a deep red robe with metallic cuffs shaped like blooming flowers. His companion dons a translucent outer coat with silk tassels that sway with every step. Their hairstyles are towering, their brows arched and painted. You've seen fashion shows. This is a fashion siege. They don't just wear outfits, they perform them. One gently mocks your plain tunic. Is that camel wool, he asks, squinting. You nod. Preparing a defense. Rough, he says. Chic. You blink. Was that a compliment? As night falls, the markets explode in a final burst of firelight and flute music. You try a rice cake shaped like a swan, and watch an opera singer take the stage in robes so stiff with embroidery they barely move, but oh, do they sparkle. A whisper from a young merchant reaches your ear. Next week, rainbow-dyed fans from the south. You nod, as if you knew already. You settle into a guest room above a silversmith's shop. Your pillow is straw. Your dreams are velvet. You drift off to the rustle of silk and laughter echoing from the street below, And tomorrow, Byzantium waits with its own wardrobe malfunctions and fashion crises. You awaken to a faint clinking sound, the silversmith downstairs hammering a brooch shaped like a phoenix mid-screech. Outside, Chang'an is already alive with the shuffle of slippers and the soft whoosh of robes catching morning breezes. You sip tea from a chipped porcelain cup and glance one last time at a silk banner flapping over the shop window, a crane standing on a turtle. Both wearing robes. You don't understand the symbolism, but you respect the commitment. It's time to leave the Tang dynasty behind. Reluctantly, like saying goodbye to a really well-dressed friend who also insists on singing opera at breakfast. Your route west takes you through dusty highlands, stony outposts, and eventually across the invisible awkward line where Asia begins shading into Europe. Somewhere past the Caspian Sea, your feet touch Byzantine soil. Welcome to Byzantium. Or rather, the Eastern Roman Empire's same dramatic energy. More sequins. Mainstream historical fact. Byzantium, especially during the reigns of emperors like Justinian the 6th century, became an economic and cultural superpower, fiercely protective of silk production and utterly obsessed with color-coded hierarchy. Purple wasn't just a fashion statement, it was practically a restraining order. If you wore imperial purple without permission, you risked execution. Yes, really. You arrive in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, and it's as if someone threw the Roman Empire into a blender with Persian, Arabic, and Christian ingredients, then garnished it with gold leaf, towering domes, crowded docks, fish markets with alarming smells and fashion as intense as the religious debates. You walk past a cathedral where priests argue over doctrine while wearing jewel-encrusted robes that would make a pop star weep. The hem of one robe alone is probably worth 3 camels and a bolt of Tang-dyed silk. Near the palace quarter, you pass a noblewoman walking a lapdog in a coat lined with sable. Her own gown is layered first linen, then silk, then a sheer overskirt trimmed with pearls. Her veil is attached to a crown so delicate it might fly away if she sneezes. Her servant carries her shoes in case the street is too muddy. You wonder, when did footwear become optional? The local market is a carnival of luxurious confusion. Traders hawk tunics trimmed with Greek key patterns, veils soaked in imported dyes, and belts carved from ivory. A boy tries to sell you a sash blessed by monks and resistant to moths. You believe one of those things. A merchant leans over a stall and whispers, "Silkworm eggs. Real ones. Smuggled from China." You blink. He winks. In hollowed-out canes, he says, "A miracle and a crime." He's not lying. Fringe tidbit. In the 6th century, 2 Nestorian monks reportedly smuggled silkworm eggs out of China and into Byzantium by hiding them in their walking staffs. This act of theological espionage kick-started the Byzantine silk industry and ended China's 1,000-year monopoly. A bold move, and possibly the world's most fashionable act of treason. You wander into a silk workshop where women in tall headdresses sit at looms, their hands flying. One leans over, showing you a fabric covered in medallions featuring griffins and lions. "For the Empress," she says proudly, "worn only twice, then stored in a cedar vault." You wonder if that's her way of saying it didn't match her earrings. Historians still argue whether the Byzantines truly innovated their own style or just perfected the remix. But what's undeniable is their passion for coded garments. rank, religious affiliation, court status, all stitched directly into what you wore. Want to show humility? Wear plain linen. Want to show divine favor? Add gold thread and a halo motif. Later, in the public square, you watch a procession go by. Officials in stiff robes dyed oxblood red or deep blue march past incense bearers and musicians. One of them trips on his hem. No one laughs. Too dangerous. Fashion here isn't just identity, it's politics. A tired-looking priest explains that certain fabrics can only be worn on certain feast days. You think style is freedom, he says, adjusting a sleeve embroidered with tiny crosses. Here, it's survival. You nod slowly, realizing that in Byzantium, your outfit can literally save your life or end it. As the sun dips below the Hagia Sophia's domes, the city glows in shades of bronze and rose. The docks bustle again, ships arriving from Alexandria, Antioch, Venice. Each one carries not just grain and wine, but bolts of dyed fabric, boxes of buttons, new hemlines, new ideas. You spend the night in a quiet inn tucked behind a spice shop. The air smells like cinnamon and salt water. Through your window, you watch a noble couple rehearsing their outfits for tomorrow's mass, him in a green robe with a tiny gold fish. Her in a layered dress so stiff she has to turn her whole body to look left. You pull your blanket tight and close your eyes. The Silk Road has crossed continents, changed hands, and transformed fabrics into power, wealth, and sometimes absurdity. Byzantium has taken the torch and turned it into a chandelier. Tomorrow, you follow that torch to Baghdad, where elegance gets its golden age. The morning air in Constantinople is thick with incense and ambition. You can almost smell the gold threads being counted. But there's no time to linger. Your route beckons southeast, curling with the Euphrates, winding through borderlands where languages shift mid-sentence and the sun feels like it's trying to melt the horizon. You journey by caravan again, this time with a group of traders who speak Arabic, Farsi, Armenian, and something that might just be a series of meaningful eyebrow raises. They're good spices, glass, scrolls, and textiles that shimmer like bottled moonlight. Everyone's whispering the same destination with a kind of reverence Baghdad. By the time you arrive, the city is glowing. Literally. Lamps flicker on minarets. Fabric canopies dance in the breeze. And somewhere nearby, a lute strikes a perfect note of arrival. Welcome to the Abbasid Caliphate's capital heart of the Islamic Golden Age, and quite unexpectedly, the most elegant place you've ever tried not to trip over a hemline. Mainstream historical fact. During the 8th and 9th centuries, Baghdad became one of the world's premier centers of learning, science, culture, and, yes, fashion. The city absorbed influences from Persia, Byzantium, Central Asia, and India, reworking them into a refined aesthetic that would define luxury across the Islamic world. You walk through the famed Souk al-Tiraz, a bazaar so massive you could lose a month's wages and never find the same vendor twice. Silk bolts are stacked like scrolls. Linen dyed with walnut shells is folded so precisely it looks ironed by angels. There's a robe here so delicate the merchant fans it out with a feather to avoid creasing it. It floats, he says, like a prayer. You do not ask how much. You cannot afford this kind of poetry. Near a perfumery, you overhear a heated discussion about neckline shapes. Square is for scholars, someone insists. Round is for musicians. Another adds, V-neck is for optimists. A passerby rolls his eyes. And asymmetrical for poets. They all agree. You turn into a quieter street and stumble across a dye house. Inside, vats of indigo, madder, and saffron bubble like a sorcerer's stew. A young woman stirs a pot with a wooden rod, her arm stained every shade of sunset. She lets you touch a wet fabric dyed with kermas produced from crushed insects. Royal red, she says. Only for those who can afford the screaming. Fringe tidbit. The Abbasids popularized cloth of gold, actual silk woven with thin gold threads, often imported from Byzantium or spun locally using beatable sheets of precious metal. This wasn't for decoration. It was worn outside, under the sun, like they wanted to blind their enemies with style. Later, you visit the House of Wisdom, the city's famed academy. While most are studying astronomy or translating Aristotle, there's also a textile historian here. Fashion is philosophy. She declares, color is mood, cut is language, thread is memory. You nod like you understand, but also kind of want to buy a tote bag with that printed on it. Historians still argue whether the Abbasids actively shaped their fashion to rival that of the Tang and Byzantines, or whether it evolved naturally through trade. Either way, the result is unmistakable Baghdad dresses like it knows it's being watched. At sunset, you're invited to a private gathering in a garden courtyard. Lanterns swing from fig trees. A singer recites verses by Rumi. The guests wear robes so fine they seem painted, not stitched. One man's sleeves are embroidered with constellations in silver thread. A woman's veil is laced with pearls in the pattern of a pomegranate. You're beginning to feel underdressed in your dust-streaked travel coat, which a small child kindly mistakes for a picnic blanket. In a side room, you spot a small sewing table with spools of dyed silk labeled by scent rose. Clove, saffron, musk. The seamstress winks. The caliph's daughter won't wear anything that doesn't smell as good as it looks. You lean in? She's not wrong. The stars above Baghdad twinkle like mirrored sequins. In the calm of night, even the city's shadows seem better tailored. You lie down beside a fountain that babbles in elegant rhythm. Your blanket smells faintly of jasmine and cardamom. You dream of floating sleeves, gold thread, and robes so beautiful they whisper in languages no one's written yet. Tomorrow, you follow the thread deeper into India where fabric becomes a canvas, a spice, and sometimes a revolution. By morning, Baghdad fades behind you in a haze of rose-scented cloth and whispered poetry. You cross the Zagros Mountains, winding slowly down into the plains of Persia before dipping into the lush, humid territories of the Indian subcontinent. The air thickens, the fabrics grow bolder, and you're sweating through your sash. But you're too distracted by the colors to care. You arrive in Gujarat, a region that hums with industry and artistry alike. Looms clatter like percussion instruments, and vats of dye bubble in open courtyards, their colors too vivid to be real. This isn't just where fabric is made, it's where it's transformed. Mainstream historical fact India, particularly regions like Gujarat and Bengal, became global centers of textile production long before Europe figured out how to wash wool properly. Indian dyers mastered techniques like bandhani tie-dye, block printing, and chintz painting crafts so advanced that even Persian and Chinese artisans took notes. You walk past artisans block printing elephants and paisley motifs onto muslin as thin as mist. One holds up a sari shimmering in crushed turmeric and madar root. This yellow, he says proudly, won't fade for 50 summers. Unless you cry on it. You ask. What if I sweat? He frowns. Then don't. You stop at a shop filled with dyed cottons, hung from the rafters like banners in a parade. The merchant lets you handle a sample lightweight, soft, yet richly pigmented. For Egypt, he says, they wear it under linen robes, keeps them cool and smug. As you sit sipping a cup of masala tea so spicy it could qualify as an exorcism, a stranger next to you pulls out a swatch of indigo-dyed cotton, printed with peacocks and dancing women. Fashion from here goes everywhere, he says. Baghdad, Mecca, Java, even to lands across the Black Water. Fringe tidbit. Some of the earliest known resist-dyed fabrics like ikat originated here. Artisans tied off threads before weaving them, creating patterns inside the fabric itself. It was slow, complicated, and perfect for showing off. Essentially the artisan version of flexing. You venture deeper into the marketplace, where dyed silk scarves flutter like prayer flags above rows of bangles, buttons, and embroidered slippers. A small girl shows you a scarf painted with goldfish in lacquer red ink. It's for weddings, she explains. Fish mean luck. Unless they're dead, then it's confusing. You laugh. Stepping into a dye yard where workers stomp indigo-dipped fabric with bare feet to soften it. The smell hits you like a fermented thunderstorm. A boy gestures proudly. Color of gods, he says, and tax collectors. Which brings us to the twist fashion isn't all fun and prints. You learn quickly that these brilliant dyes, especially indigo and saffron, were tightly controlled. In some regions, only royalty could wear them. In others, the British East India Company, still centuries away, but slowly gaining a foothold, would turn this dye economy into a tool of empire. Historians still argue whether Indian fabric exports empowered local economies or laid the groundwork for colonial exploitation. The truth lies somewhere between a hand-woven dream and a factory-loomed nightmare. At a temple festival in the evening, you watch dancers swirl in mirrored lehengas, their skirts catching the lantern light like disco balls. Bells jingle at every step, and you swear one woman's dupatta changes color as she moves blue one moment, green the next. You ask how. Her friend whispers, 3 kinds of dye, 1 silk. The rest is illusion. You're offered sweets wrapped in banana leaves and compliments on your decidedly unimpressive tunic. Is that camel wool, someone asks, barely suppressing a grimace. You shrug. From the steps, you reply, pretending that makes it better. You walk along the river that night, where the moon reflects in puddles of abandoned dye. Even the water looks like it's dressed for a party. You spot a boatman wearing a printed cotton turban, proudly twisted into a 4-pointed shape. Gujarat style. He grins. My cousin in Arabia wears it backward. Very controversial. In the distance, the temple bells chime gently over the hum of looms that never quite stop. You wrap yourself in a borrowed cotton shawl dyed with marigold, lined with thin silk trim, and lie down beside the edge of a field where women are setting fabric to dry in long, colorful lines that ripple like silk serpents in the wind. Tomorrow, the wind will change direction, and it'll carry you north toward a storm named Genghis. But tonight, India cradles you in color, heat, and the soft rhythm of thread being pulled through history. You wake with sunlight pouring over lines of drying fabric like some kind of divine laundry day. The shawl around your shoulders still smells of marigold and iron mordant. Insects buzz softly in the early heat, and traders are already at work, folding yards of indigo-dyed cotton into tight, perfect squares. But today, the colors fade behind you. You're heading into the lands of smoke, speed, and sudden conquest. North, into the steppe again, into Mongol territory. You mount a horse borrowed from a generous, if somewhat suspicious, weaver, and ride out with a caravan headed towards Samarkand and beyond. Somewhere between the mountain passes and the echoing plains, the wind changes, and you feel it. The air tastes like distance, and the fabric is thicker now, quilted, layered, built to endure. Because Genghis Khan's empire wasn't subtle, and neither was its fashion. Mainstream historical fact. Under the Mongol Empire, which at its height spanned from Korea to Hungary, clothing became both armor and billboard. The Mongols favored heavy deals long, belted robes made from thick wool or padded silk. Function ruled, but luxury crept in, especially among the elite. You pass through caravan towns under Mongol protection, where tax collectors wear boots so shiny you can see your confused face in them. A merchant shows off a deal embroidered with gold thread dragons. Not mine, he admits, but the man who wore it, very much dead. In a smoky yurt, you meet a woman boiling silk in goat fat to make it water-resistant. War silk, she explains, doesn't tear, unless pierced by guilt or arrow. She laughs, and you're not sure if she's joking. Fringe tidbit. The Mongols often repurposed captured luxury goods robes from Chinese officials. Persian silks, even European brocade refashioning them to fit their nomadic lifestyle. One report even notes a Mongol general wearing a Venetian-style robe over armor. Imagine getting raided and your attackers wearing your uncle's wedding tunic. You reach Samarkand, where Mongol influence blends with Timurid style in ways that make your eyeballs twitch. Picture it, the brutal clarity of the steppe fused with Persian floral excess. That's the fashion. Think quilted jackets with hand-painted cuffs, boots with turquoise trim, horsehair belts worn diagonally just to make a point. One tailor offers to Mongolify your camel wool robe. More leather, he mutters, already pulling out strips dyed ox blood red. Maybe a clasp made of bone. You'll look violent, but stylish. You decline gently. In the marketplace, you watch Mongol aristocrats buy Chinese silks to line the inside of their deals because comfort still matters, even when your empire runs on conquest and dairy. You sip salty milk tea beside a storyteller who swears Kublai Khan once wore a robe made entirely of golden peacock feathers. It shimmered in moonlight, he whispers, and terrified the Pope's ambassador. You nod respectfully, wondering how itchy it must have been. Historians still argue whether Mongol fashion had lasting influence beyond court aesthetics, or whether it merely acted as a blender, taking everything in, grinding it into something new, then charging across continents while looking fabulous. But there's no denying the range fur-lined winter gear for the steppe, feather-light silk tunics for court receptions, and armor so decorative it should have been in a museum instead of a battlefield. You spend a night among a Mongol convoy heading west, horses grazing under the stars, guards wearing layered robes with dagger loops stitched into the hem. A teenage archer near you wears sleeves embroidered with flames. My mother's idea, she says. She thought I'd look faster, might you believe it? Ooh. One man proudly shows off his sash, which doubles as a map. Every knot marks a city. He says, "My belt is smarter than most emperors." Another nods sagely, except for the part where it won't get you out of taxes. There's something oddly elegant about how the Mongols treat clothing not as vanity, but as legacy. Robes are passed down like horses. Stains become stories. Stitching becomes status. In the early morning, you ride across open plains where wind howls like a hungry god, and silk scarves tied to poles flutter like ghosts. You wear a borrowed deal now, thick, warm, stitched with a falcon and gold thread over your heart. It's heavier than what you're used to. But in this land, everything is... You pull the robe tighter and look west. Tomorrow, you reach Venice where silk gets theatrical. But tonight, under a sky too big for words, you sleep wrapped in a warrior's coat, dreaming of feathers, flames, and a road that never ends. The Mongol plains eventually give way to rocky hills, vineyards, and then, unexpectedly, the scent of sea air. You've arrived in Venice, but not the postcard-perfect Venice you're imagining. No, this is medieval Venice. A bit soggy, somewhat scheming, and utterly obsessed with how it looks. The moment your boat glides into the Grand Canal, you realize fashion here isn't just display, it's identity warfare. Everyone is trying to outdress everyone else. Cloaks billow dramatically from gondolas. Hats have peaks so tall they'd be banned as architecture in other cities. A nobleman with golden sleeves gestures at a church facade and mutters, "Too plain." You're not sure if he means the building or your outfit. Mainstream historical fact. Venice became one of the most important silk re-export hubs in Europe during the 13th and 14th centuries. Venetian merchants brokered deals from Constantinople, the Middle East, and even as far as China, converting raw materials into high-fashion commodities, then selling them to the European elite at an appropriately soul-crushing markup. You step into a silk merchant's shop, where the walls are covered in damask, a type of fabric so ornate you almost expect it to speak. The shopkeeper, draped in 4 layers of strategically clashing patterns, offers you a cup of bitter almond wine. "Persian base," he says, gesturing to a bolt of cloth with stylized lions. "Woven here? Better." Yes, the fabric feels like moonlight if moonlight had opinions about who gets invited to dinner. You admire a swatch of brocatelle, woven with a pattern so thick it's practically relief sculpture. "For chair backs," the merchant says, "and overly dramatic sleeves, fringe tidbit." Some Venetian tailors secretly smuggled foreign fabrics and dye recipes through the city's labyrinthine canals, wrapped in fish, stuffed in wine barrels, even hidden under the skirts of complicit nuns. They called it textile piracy, and in Venice it was an Olympic sport. Outside, the piazza is buzzing. A wedding party passes by. The bride draped in silver-threaded velvet. Her sleeves so wide a pigeon briefly lands on one and rides it like a hammock. The groom's tunic has a train longer than your patience. You wonder how they plan to kiss without igniting static electricity. You wander into the Scuola Grande di San Marco, where paintings of saints wear outfits that were absolutely not contemporary to their lifetimes. That apostle, he's in 14th century Italian silk, gold piping, and some pretty questionable sandals. Historical accuracy, 0. Style points, 12 out of 10. You pass a group of teenage apprentices arguing over doublet styles. Pointed cuffs make your arms look longer. One insists, and your fingers look like you play the lute. Another rolls his eyes. Unless your hands are ugly. Then it's tragic. One girl wears a mask, yes. During the day decorated with silver thread and tiny mirrors. My uncle's a dyer, she says. He makes silk blush. You raise an eyebrow. He dyes it pink. She smirks. No. He embarrasses it. Very different. Historians still argue whether Venice truly innovated its own style or simply commodified everyone else's. What's undeniable is their genius for remixing Turkish motifs over Byzantine weaves, Arab-influenced tassels sewn onto Italian court gowns. Every layer, every hemline, every bead is a conversation between cultures, though. Most Venetians will tell you they started it. You duck into a back alley where the city's quieter craftspeople work. A man hunches over a table, sewing pearls into the hem of a cloak. For a bishop, he says, he wants to sparkle without sin. Next to him, a woman embroiders a sash with tiny foxes. For his mistress, she adds. More honest. By the docks, crates are being unloaded from galleys' Persian silks, Chinese satins, Indian cottons. One crate bursts open, revealing bolts in shades of plum, ochre, and mint. A passing gondolier whistles. Those colors will get you noticed. Or murdered. Hard to say. You overhear a heated debate near the Rialto Bridge between a merchant and a tailor about the ethics of sumptuary laws. If I can afford gold thread, the merchant fumes. Why shouldn't I wear it? The tailor shrugs. Because your cousin's the judge who enforces the ban. You laugh quietly and step into a quiet church where the floor is inlaid with tessellated marble. A monk sweeps past you in a robe clearly made of dyed silk. Donated, he says. Not looking back. By someone who'd rather not go to hell unfashionably. That night, you sit on the edge of a canal, watching moonlight ripple through reflections of hanging silks drying on lines above. You think of Baghdad's grace, the Mongols' practicality, India's saturated hues, and how Venice doesn't really absorb fashion so much as parade it until everyone claps. You wrap yourself in a borrowed velvet cloak lined with crushed damask and stare at the stars reflected in the water. Tomorrow, you'll travel inland where all this theatrical splendor trickles slowly into the wardrobes of Europe's colder, moodier cities. But tonight, Venice wears the world like a scarf. By dawn, Venice fades behind you in a mist of perfume, salt, and overpriced velvet. You board a merchant's cart heading north, rattling through the soft hills of Lombardy, dodging puddles the size of philosophical debates, and eventually arriving at the gates of Paris. Not modern Paris with cafes and existential crises, but medieval Paris, with alleyways full of fish guts, students shouting Latin poetry at goats, and young people, of course, trying to dress like they invented tailoring. This isn't the Paris of Versailles or the Eiffel Tower. This is the gritty, street-level version of elegance where fashion bleeds upward. Where students, bakers' sons, and off-duty knights wrap themselves in the latest style from some distant caravan. Wear it slightly wrong, and suddenly, boom, it's cool. Mainstream historical fact. By the 13th and 14th centuries, Paris had become one of Europe's fashion nerve centers. While royalty still clung to traditional garb, the city's youth, especially in the Latin Quarter, were remixing Mongol, Arabic, and Eastern styles into what can only be described as medieval streetwear. You stroll down Rue Saint-Denis and immediately spotted a group of apprentices loitering near a candle shop. wearing coats with slanted seams and high collars fastened, not with buttons, but with knotted cords and unmistakably Mongol touch. Their linen tunics peek out from underneath. Still traditionally Western, but now layered like a fashion thesis. One teen adjusts his wide leather belt with enough swagger to suggest it's more for status than sword. His friend's sleeves are so long they nearly dip in the gutter water. But that's the point. Long sleeves mean you don't have to work. Someone whispers nearby, unless you're rich and pretending not to. You enter a tailor's shop where a new hybrid garment is on display, part French tabard, part silk road tunic, with exaggerated shoulders and a hemline trimmed in imported Persian braid. We call it le mélange, the tailor says. The bishop hates it. Therefore, it sells fringe tidbit. Parisian youth during this period were infamous for ignoring sumptuary laws, especially in winter, when they'd wrap themselves in Eastern-style coats lined with fur and silk. These coats, often referred to mockingly as Saracen cloaks, became symbols of rebellion and poor budgeting. You find your way to the Sorbonne, where fashion is also academic literally. Students gather and debate over whether brighter colors make a man appear wiser or just wealthier. Blue is divine, one argues, quoting Aristotle. Another retorts, only if the blue came from India? Otherwise, it's just muddy. You duck into a side alley where a dyer shows off a coat he's tinted with crushed berries and soot. For a poet, he explains, he wants to look sad. You nod solemnly, resisting the urge to ask whether he charged extra for the existential undertones. At the market square, a vendor holds up a coat with fastenings made from braided hair. Real Mongol design, he says, or possibly Italian. We don't ask questions. The garment is being sold alongside wooden clogs carved to look like Persian slippers. The blend of cultures here is shameless and charming. You spot a noblewoman near the cathedral, watching the crowd from her carriage. Her sleeves are flared and lined with imported silk. Beneath her outer cloak, a patterned underdress gleams with tiny lotus blossoms, likely Chinese in origin. Her veil, however, is stiffly Western. The result is mesmerizing and a little confusing, like watching someone try to combine opera and punk rock. Historians still argue whether these fashion mashups in medieval Europe were acts of genuine cultural admiration or simple trend chasing. Most agree it was both. But one thing's clear, Paris didn't just copy the Silk Road, it interpreted it loudly. And sometimes while juggling apples in the street. That night, in a cramped tavern near the university, you sit beside a group of musicians in layered robes, each trimmed with fabric scraps from Baghdad and Samarkand. One of them is wearing slippers dyed saffron yellow illegal, but undeniably fabulous. A scholar in the corner, nose deep in a manuscript, mutters about the moral corruption of foreign fashion. Someone hands him a glass of wine and adjusts his collar for him. Just drink, they say. You look like Byzantium threw up on you. He blushes. It's a compliment. You retire to a loft above the tavern, where your mattress is straw and your pillow is an old robe rolled tightly. Through the small window, you can see the city glowing faintly from 1,000 candles. You think of the cloaks, the clogs, the quiet rebellion stitched into every mismatched seam. Tomorrow, the road will turn east again, but far east, to Kyoto, where fashion doesn't just decorate the body, it tells your lineage. But tonight, You sleep wrapped in the scent of rain, candle wax, and your own increasingly wrinkled Mongol fusion tunic. The rain follows you out of Paris like a melancholic love song you didn't ask for. You wrap your hybrid Mongol-Parisian tunic a little tighter and continue eastward, riding over damp earth and into ships bound for a distant shore. After weeks of cramped decks, dried fish, and debating with a sailor about whether silk floats it doesn't, the mists finally part, and you arrive in Kyoto, Imperial Japan's soft-spoken yet sartorially fierce heart. Here, everything moves slower, more precise. The streets are hushed, lined with pale wooden houses and paper screens that hide whole lives and entire wardrobes just out of view. But make no mistake, Kyoto may be quiet, but its fashion speaks volumes. Mainstream historical fact. During the Heian period 794 to 1185, and later into the Kamakura and Muromachi periods, Japan absorbed and transformed continental Asian influences, especially those brought via Korean and Chinese trade routes. Over time, Japan crafted a highly refined, deeply symbolic fashion system rooted in formality, layering, and subtle visual poetry. You arrive at a Kyoto textile house nestled between two cherry trees, their petals drifting like whispered secrets. Inside, robes hang in vertical rows, each a study in balanced muted indigos paired with golden ochres. Pine greens beside ash grays. Nothing shouts, but everything speaks. An attendant bows and presents you with a bolt of silk. Persian dye, Japanese weave, designed for a courtier with Persian dreams. She says with a soft smile. You run your fingers over the fabric and feel the harmony tight stitching. Delicate threadwork, a hint of turmeric scent. You wander through a district of tailors, where kusode the kimono's earlier form are being carefully folded into cedar-lined drawers. One shop has a robe decorated with cranes flying over stylized waves, each wing feather brushed with ink so light it might evaporate. The ink was imported from Song, China, the tailor says, but the crane's ours. Fringe tidbit. Some noble women in the Heian court reportedly wore up to 12 layered robes, with each color selected based on seasonal palettes and poetic reference. A wrong combination could mean fashion disaster or worse. Social exile. Imagine being ostracized because your sleeve didn't match the poem of the month. You attend a poetry gathering in a lantern-lit garden, where guests recline on tatami mats in robes that whisper when they move. A nobleman adjusts his eboshi cap and recites a verse comparing his lover's laughter to falling wisteria. His companion wears a kariganu, a hunting robe turned everyday wear for the refined, with a Chinese-inspired roundel stitched in silver thread. Neither of them blink at the irony. Historians still argue whether Japan's adoption of Silk Road motifs diluted native identity or enhanced it. The truth, Japan did what it always does, took outside influence, filtered it through ritual and rhythm, and emerged with something uniquely theirs. You visit a temple where monks chant under a canopy embroidered with Chinese dragons and lotus blooms. Donated by a Korean envoy, one whispers, blessed by 3 abbots, and laundered very carefully. Later, in the imperial court, you catch a glimpse of a noblewoman adjusting her Junihito robe ensemble. Her sleeves alone carry 6 layers plum, persimmon, ivory, bamboo, pine, and seafoam. Seasonal harmony, she murmurs. And family obligation. You ask if it's heavy. She nods. Like expectations. At a nearby print shop, You find artists replicating imported fabric patterns as woodblock prints. A printmaker shows you a scroll featuring Persian paisleys adapted into Japanese plum motifs. We trace the outside world, he says, then fold it like origami. As night descends, you walk along a Kyoto canal where the moon's reflection ripples between boats carrying bolts of silk wrapped in protective rice paper. A woman kneels at the edge, rinsing dyed fabric in the cool water. From Bengal, she explains. For a bridal kimono, the bride asked for something that remembers where we've been. You lie down in a guest house built of cedar and silence. Your bedding smells of dried chrysanthemum. From a nearby room, someone hums an old Korean folk song, threading it through the quiet like a seam through silk. Tomorrow. The Silk Road takes another twist into Plague-era Europe, where luxury gets practical, and people start wearing silk for survival or at least pretend it helps. But tonight, Kyoto teaches you how to listen to what clothing doesn't say. You leave Kyoto at dawn, slipping away like a fabric thread tugged from an embroidered robe. The path winds back westward now across sea, desert, and time until you land with a jolt in 14th century Europe, where things are not quite as poetic. You're in Florence, or maybe Avignon, or possibly somewhere near Lubeck. It's hard to tell at first because everyone is wearing gloves and masks, and not for fun. Welcome to Plague-era chic, the dark period where death whispered through alleyways, and people began dressing like fashion could save their souls. Mainstream historical fact. During the Black Death mid-14th century, Europe witnessed both a collapse and a transformation of textile culture. On the one hand, labor shortages devastated production. On the other, the sudden fluidity of class structures, coupled with panic, brought changes in how people dressed. Clothing became protective, expressive, and in some cases, performatively pious. You step into a narrow town square, where everything smells faintly of ash and boiled herbs. A woman hurries by in a veil that covers most of her face, pale linen, embroidered with tiny crosses. Her gloves are buttoned so tightly at the wrist that her fingers are going purple. You nod. Fashion is now survival cosplay. The merchant beside you hawks silk face coverings, scented with dried lavender and camphor. Stops miasma, he promises, and marriage proposals. You buy one anyway. It's surprisingly soft. At a nearby tailor's shop, mannequins wear robes of black and ash gray, cut with tighter sleeves than usual. Less fabric to carry germs, the tailor mutters, or to catch fire. Either way, slimmer silhouettes are in. He shows you a new lining stitched into a nobleman's coat, rose oil-soaked wool. You raise an eyebrow. He thinks the roses will scare the plague away. The tailor shrugs. They haven't. But he smells incredible. You turn into a side alley and meet a dyer stirring a vat of muddy purple. No one wants bright colors anymore, she says. They draw attention. Attention gets you blamed. She points to a faded green robe hanging nearby. That one burned a week later. The wearer danced in the street. People didn't like that. Fringe tidbit. During peak plague years, European cities passed laws banning ostentatious dress. Partly as a moral response to suffering, and partly to avoid panicking the population. But in reality, the opposite often occurred. Nobles doubled down on extravagance, dressing in gold-threaded cloaks and bejeweled masks as if daring death to notice. You visit a noble estate where servants, clad in wool tunics dyed charcoal, silently mop floors with vinegar. Upstairs, the lady of the house reclines in a morning gown made of black silk, her collar stiff with starch. "I have not smiled since the barber died," she whispers. Then she smirks. "But my hemline." Devastating. In the city center, a group of plague doctors parade by, wearing the now iconic beaked masks, cloaks, and wide-brimmed hats. You approach one. "Is that silk under the robe, you ask?" He nods. "Keeps the sweat off. Plus, the Pope said it's less sinful than cotton." You're not sure that's medically sound? Historians still argue whether the sumptuary laws enacted during the plague were effective, performative, or just medieval PR. Some cities outlawed gold trim. Others tried to ban foreign dyes. One town made it illegal to wear red shoes on Sundays unless you were actively repenting. Enforcement haphazard at best. Meanwhile, fashion continued. You spot a baker's wife wearing a kirtle made from salvaged silk curtains. They don't need them anymore. She shrugs. Her apron is embroidered with tiny skulls. You compliment it. "My niece made it." She beams. "We do arts and crafts after funerals." You retreat to a bathhouse converted into a makeshift dyeing room. There, cloth is soaked in solutions of vinegar, wine, and curiously ashes from burnt devotional pamphlets. "We boil hope," the dyer jokes. "Then we stitch it." That night, you sleep in a hayloft above a chapel, wrapped in a borrowed cloak smelling faintly of clove and regret. Below, someone plays a somber tune on a flute. A man weeps. A woman laughs. The city dreams fever dreams in black. Gray and muted silk. Tomorrow, Europe will get tired of being told what not to wear and swing hard into the world of fashion laws, fines, and flair. But tonight, you sleep beneath rafters that once echoed with prayer, now draped in silk masks hung out to dry. You leave the city before sunrise, stepping over puddles that reflect torchlight and sky in equal parts. The scent of clove and burnt fabric still clings to your cloak. You ride through meadows misted in gray, past windmills, cathedrals, and villages where everyone seems to be simultaneously mourning, repenting, and judging your boots. By the time you reach Florence, it's the late 14th century, and Europe is deep into what can only be described as a textile identity crisis. People have survived plague, famine, war, and now they're trying to survive fashion itself. Or more accurately, survive each other's fashion choices. Mainstream historical fact. The post-plague period saw a dramatic rise in sumptuary laws across Europe. These were rules designed to regulate who could wear what, based on class, income, gender, marital status, religion, and occasionally, how threatening you looked in velvet. Ostensibly meant to maintain social order, these laws often ended up fueling more creativity and more rule-breaking. You arrive in the bustling heart of Florence just in time to witness a public shaming. A baker, caught wearing silk stockings beyond his station, is being scolded by a priest while his stockings are cut from his legs dramatically. A crowd watches in silence, some scandalized, others just taking mental notes. They were quite nice. A woman murmurs, "Shame." You step into a tailor's workshop where 3 apprentices are sorting garments into piles. Legal, borderline, and absolutely forbidden. One robe trimmed with squirrel fur is being hastily rehemmed. slightly above the knee. The tailor mutters, "That makes it monastic enough." He holds up a bolt of imported silk indigo and gold, woven with lions and pomegranates. "Technically only for nobles," he says, "but if you wear it inside out and say you're mourning a cousin, they let it pass." You raise an eyebrow? He shrugs. Fashion is litigation. You pass through a piazza where young nobles are showing off houppelons voluminous, wide-sleeved robes with collars so high they double as neck rests. "The Pope says we're too vain," one youth says proudly, adjusting his feathered cap. But vanity looks excellent in backlight. Fringe tidbit. In some regions, laws dictated the number of buttons one could wear based on social rank. That's right, buttons. One Flemish merchant was fined for having 37 buttons on a single coat. He claimed it was accidental. His tailor claimed he lost count. The court remained unconvinced. You visit a cloth guild hall where officials are inspecting bolts of fabric submitted for approval. One velvet roll is turned away for excessive luster. Another, embroidered with dragons, is deemed too Saracen for use in bridal gowns. You ask what qualifies as just Saracen enough. No one knows. Historians still argue whether sumptuary laws were actually enforceable or just symbolic moral theater. Most agree they were inconsistently applied. Rich merchants got away with murder and ermine, while washerwomen were fined for wearing coral necklaces. In a quieter alley, a seamstress lets you into her studio, where garments are camouflaged luxury hems stitched with silk thread underneath. Linings dyed in forbidden colors only visible when the wind lifts a skirt. People think fashion is about display. She says it's actually about cleverness. She shows you a bride's gown with hidden panels of crimson silk and hand-painted fleur-de-lis. Her family pretends to be poor. Her uncle is a bishop. He gave her the lace. You touch the fabric. It feels like secrets and confidence. You follow a rumor to Siena, where artisans are dyeing cloth with crushed insects smuggled from Spain, an early precursor to cochineal. The color is deep, violent red. Too loud for mass, a monk says. Perfect for murder trials. At a tailor's guild dinner, hosted with far too much wine and passive aggression. You hear stories of men who married up just to gain the right to wear scarlet hose. Worth it, one says, lifting his leg to display his calves. Another winces. I faked a title, he whispers, just for the boots. You sleep that night in a rented attic room above a perfumer's shop. The windows are warped, the mattress thin, but your blanket is a faded brocade that once belonged to a minor duchess. You know this because the landlady told you 6 times and added 2 florins to your bill. Through the window, you hear the bells of Florence tolling midnight. Somewhere below, someone's hemming a coat just a little too long. Someone else is sewing a veil in a color she isn't technically allowed to wear. And a boy on the street is proudly wearing a tunic made from curtain scraps and dreams. Tomorrow, cotton will rise a quieter, softer fabric. The kind you underestimate until it rewrites everything. But tonight, Europe sleeps in defiance, tucked beneath velvet borders and gold-stitched rules. You wake up tangled in brocade and bureaucracy. The attic window rattles with morning bells. And downstairs, the perfumer is already boiling something that smells like roses and regret. You slip your boots on still slightly illegal in Florence, by the way, and step back onto the road, leaving behind the thread count tribunals and button-counting patrols of medieval Europe. The next stop isn't about extravagance or law, it's about comfort. You head south toward ports buzzing with gossip and cargo, and then onto the ships that sail beyond the Mediterranean. Trade winds pull you across the waves until you land in India again. But this time, something's changed. The looms are quieter, the dye's less guarded, and the cotton. Oh, the cotton has arrived. Mainstream historical fact. By the 16th century, Indian cotton textiles, especially those from Gujarat, Coromandel, and Bengal, were dominating the global fabric trade. Lightweight, colorful, and easier to care for than silk or wool. Cotton quickly became the most desirable material for commoners and elites alike, especially as Europe scrambled to keep up. You find yourself in the vibrant port city of Masulipatam, where merchants carry bundles of fine calico and chintz cottons printed with floral and geometric patterns so delicate you mistake them for paintings. A vendor lets you handle a length of dyed cotton so light it floats in the breeze. Made for the French? He grins. But the Dutch took it. Don't tell. You see rolls of cotton being block printed with wooden stamps dipped in rich indigo, then left to dry under the sun like pages in a silent storybook. Beside them, women twist cotton yarn into spools so fine they could pass for silk at a glance. Except silk doesn't breathe like this, and it certainly doesn't make you feel this cool in the Indian heat. You spot a merchant layering cotton under a sheer silk robe. This, he says, softness and prestige. You run your fingers over it and realize this isn't about fashion anymore. It's about comfort that whispers instead of shouting. Fringe tidbit. Some Europeans initially refused to believe cotton came from a plant. Early theories insisted it grew from trees with little lambs dangling from the branches, a botanical misunderstanding so enduring it inspired actual paintings of sheep plants. Because science, you pass through weaver villages where families have been working cotton for generations. They spin, dye, print, and stitch with an ease that humbles the silk arrogance of the courts you just left behind. A boy shows you a tunic made by his mother indigo with red borders and stitched with subtle gold thread. For my wedding, he says shyly, unless I get taller. Later, you travel north to Bengal, where the cotton is so fine they call it woven air. The famed muslin of Dhaka, used for royal robes and fashionable exports, is nearly invisible when held to light. A weaver challenges you to count the threads per inch. You fail immediately. You stop at a riverbank where dye vats boil like cauldrons. The colors madder red, mango yellow, palm green. These aren't just hues, they're chapters in an economy built from thread. You hear of British traders scrambling to secure contracts, Portuguese ships smuggling bolts to bypass taxes, and Ottoman tailors praising Indian cotton as blessed by breeze. Historians still argue whether the rise of cotton truly signaled the democratization of fashion. Some claim it made fine clothing accessible to the poor. Others point out that, soon enough, colonial empires would twist that accessibility into exploitation. You pass through a British trading post where imported cotton is being repackaged for export labeled, stamped, and taxed. One Englishman pulls you aside and says, "You know what we call it, white gold." You don't reply. You're too distracted by the irony of a man sweating through a thick wool vest while standing next to a bale of breathable cotton. A Dutch merchant teaches you how to fold a cotton kerchief into 14 different hats. One for every mood, he jokes, donning a triangle fold that makes him look like a sleepy pirate. Cotton's a mood fabric. You spend the night in a hut overlooking the sea, wrapped in a cotton quilt dyed with a pattern that reminds you of Kyoto waves and Venetian fans. The stars blink through the gauze of a linen canopy. You think of the shift how silk carried you across deserts, but cotton coaxes you into stillness. Tomorrow, the journey grows darker when empires turn cloth into chains. But tonight, wrapped in the softness of woven air, you sleep easily. The dawn is soft, the air salted and warm. But as you rise, stretch, and brush last night's dreams from your sleeve, the mood shifts. You're heading into a new era now, one less fragrant with flowers and floating muslin, and more steeped in conquest, contracts, and coercion. The age of empire has arrived, and suddenly every bolt of fabric is no longer just a garment, it's leverage. You sail west again, weaving through oceans now knotted by global ambition. Spanish galleons, Dutch East Indiamen, British frigates, they all crisscross waters heavy with cotton, silk, and the dreams of domination. When you dock in London, the fog welcomes you like a suspicious doorman. It's cold, it's gray, and yet the windows are dressed in chintz. Mainstream historical fact. Between the 17th and 19th centuries, cotton and silk, especially from India, became central to the economic engines of colonial empires. Textile production, trade, and regulation were used not just to clothe people, but to control them. Colonized regions were forced to export raw materials and buy back processed goods, all while their own textile traditions were dismantled. You step into a London shop with polished wood counters and bells that chime when bolts of calico are unrolled. Imported, the shopkeeper boasts, but tailored in Spitalfields? The print is familiar, a Bengal pattern, now faded, its flowers stiffer, the dye too even. We fix it up a bit, he adds, adjusting a fake monocle. Make it suitable for English homes. Outside, an East India Company office looms like a temple to transaction. You see a ledger listing silk shipments by weight, cotton by color, human labor by cost. Somewhere in the margins, someone's added, bestsellers morning silks, wedding chintz, military bunting. You head north to Manchester, where giant textile mills churn like monsters' iron. Steam, and relentless rhythm. The cotton here is cheap, rougher, stripped of story. You watch children feeding thread into looms. Their hands are stained with indigo. Their eyes are older than their years. Fringe tidbit. In some cases, British factory owners replicated Indian block-printed fabrics using toxic chemical dyes and coarse weaves so convincingly that they sold them back to Indian markets, undercutting native artisans. It's a trade loop so cynical it could be framed in a museum of irony. You stop in a modest parlor where a woman stitches floral embroidery onto a baby's cotton cap. Chintz, she says softly. They say it makes children smarter, or maybe just more marketable. You nod. She doesn't look up. Historians still argue whether fashion under empire was resistance, assimilation, or both. Indian weavers snuck traditional motifs into British military uniforms. African tailors took imported cloth and stitched it into local pride. Caribbean women combined French silhouettes with head wraps and hand-stitched embroidery. Colonization forced a merger, but not silence. You cross the Atlantic to the American colonies, where homespun becomes a quiet rebellion. Colonists boycott British cloth, weaving coarse linen and wool in protest. One woman shows you her shawl frayed, uneven, but stitched with a tiny star. Every stitch, she whispers, is a middle finger on plantations in the South. Enslaved Africans work cotton fields by day, then stitch their own garments by moonlight, reworking scraps into expressions of identity that slavery tried to erase. A man shows you his quilt, patchwork dyed with root, rust, and memory. My mother taught me, he says before they sold her. At a market in New Orleans, you see Haitian immigrants selling lace-trimmed bonnets made from European silk and West African cotton. Revolution tastes better with embroidery. One seller jokes, especially when you wear it with lipstick and purpose. And then you arrive in Calcutta, now under British rule, where Indian weavers quietly hum songs of older times as they work in government-regulated factories. One whispers, "This design from my grandfather, forbidden now, but I sneak it into collars." In a dusty corner, a woman offers you a kantha shawl recycled sari cloth, hand-stitched with running lines of thread. Every stitch, she says, remembers. You hold the fabric up to the light. It shimmers with resilience. Empires love uniforms, but the people, they love stories. And even in the darkest hours of fashion history, the thread keeps running through hands, through borders, through time. That night, you lie beneath a cotton blanket dyed in faded pomegranate red, stitched with a pattern older than borders. Outside, someone sings a lullaby in a language banned by law but kept alive by whisper. Tomorrow, you'll follow a smaller trail, a single shining button into a surprisingly powerful chapter. But tonight, you rest in the gentle truth that fashion endures, even when freedom doesn't. Morning greets you not with trumpets or empire flags, but with the soft clink, the sound of a button rolling across a wooden table. You're in Istanbul now, sipping dark coffee beside a merchant whose fingers are calloused from centuries of trade or maybe just very enthusiastic bartering. On the table between you lies a small tray, and on that tray rests a mother-of-pearl button, no larger than a coin, catching the light with quiet elegance. It's beautiful. It's ordinary. It's everywhere. And it changes everything. Mainstream historical fact. Buttons, especially decorative and functional ones, became a major part of fashion history between the 16th and 19th centuries. Initially symbols of prestige, hand-carved, jewel-studded, or made of precious shell, they evolved into subtle power statements and everyday necessities. The button trade, though tiny compared to silk or cotton, played a fascinating role in shaping how clothes were worn, made, and even perceived. The merchant leans in, gently nudging the button towards you. Found it in a shipment of coffee beans, he says. From the Levant. Or maybe France. Hard to tell. The buttons travel more than I do. You tuck it into your pocket. Outside, the market is alive. Not with bolts of fabric or shimmering silk this time, but with fastenings, clasps, toggles, buckles, ties, and yes, buttons of every shape, material, and political implication. One stall sells brass buttons stamped with Arabic calligraphy. Another features silver toggles shaped like crescent moons. Yet another proudly displays military buttons, each one tiny, shining evidence of conquest or costume. You stop at a tailor's shop where an apprentice is carefully sewing wooden buttons onto a wool coat. For a merchant's son, she explains, he wants to look reliable, so we use 4-hole buttons. You nod slowly, pretending you knew 2-hole buttons were suspicious. Fringe tidbit. In 18th century France, Decorative buttons were so luxurious and absurdly detailed, some even miniature portraits in enamel, that aristocrats carried spare sets to match different moods or visitors. Some buttons were never even used, displayed instead in velvet-lined cases like tiny art galleries of ego. You walk through a military garrison where uniforms are being inspected not for wear, but for button count. One coat has 28 brass buttons. The lieutenant scowls. Regulation is 26. He mutters, "The tailor will be corrected." Somewhere nearby, a button maker sighs into his hands. Historians still argue whether buttons changed fashion more than fabric itself. After all, the introduction of functional buttons meant garments could become more tailored, more structured, and more complicated. Suddenly, jackets had shape, bodices curved, sleeves puffed. Clothes didn't just hang anymore, they hugged. In Vienna, you find a button museum? Yes, really, where cases are filled with buttons made of bone, horn, shell, tin, glass, amber, even coconut shell. A curator beams. Each one, she whispers, is a tiny revolution. She points to a dull, cracked button from a soldier's coat during the Napoleonic Wars. He survived. The coat didn't, but the button stayed. In Prague, a boy shows you a jacket passed down from his grandfather. It's threadbare, but each button has a tiny story, one from a cousin's wedding, one from a stolen overcoat, one made by a friend who now lives in Canada. "It's my family tree," he says, "but wearable. You travel to Poland, where buttons became symbols of resistance during World War II. One tailor teaches you how to sew coded messages into a jacket using button placement. Top button off center. It means safe to speak." She smiles. Only useful if they notice. And then there's Paris again, modernizing now, where fashion houses start branding buttons. Chanel, Dior, Balmain. A single embossed button becomes as powerful as a signature. A woman in a velvet coat flicks her wrist. You catch a glimpse of 3 golden interlocked C's on her cuff. She doesn't look at you. She doesn't need to. Buttons are more than fasteners. They're choices. You begin to notice them everywhere in photographs, paintings, heirlooms, pockets, cufflinks, keepsake boxes, prayer beads, memory jars, a sailor's uniform framed above a fireplace, a child's lost coat hanging on a fence, a wedding dress, preserved. Every button still in place like tiny exhaled prayers. And somewhere along the road, in a town you've forgotten the name of, you give your mother-of-pearl button away to a girl whose coat was missing one. She smiles. It fits. It clicks. And she walks away warmer. Tomorrow, you'll follow the thread to its final destination where trains, ships, and machines begin to unravel the old Silk Road and weave a faster, noisier one. But tonight, you lie on a narrow cot in a guest house above a button shop, lulled to sleep by the faint sound of cloth meeting closure, one stitch at a time. Your sleep is deep and dreamless, save for a vague image of buttons clicking together like stars. Morning light filters through the wooden shutters above the button shop, and when you step outside, something feels different. The horses are fewer now, the caravan's less dusty, and the hum in the air, not wine, not voices, but machinery. You've arrived at the tipping point, the moment when the ancient Silk Road begins dissolving into railways, cargo ships, and steam-powered ambition. Welcome to the 19th century. The world is speeding up, and your wardrobe, it's going global. faster than you can lace a boot. Mainstream historical fact. The Industrial Revolution fueled by mechanized looms, colonial cotton plantations, and new transportation networks reshaped the global textile industry. The old Silk Road faded not because it failed, but because it couldn't compete with steel tracks and steamships. You hop aboard a train in Delhi, headed for the coast. The carriage smells like coal, oil, and freshly printed cotton. A woman beside you carries a bundle of Lancashire calico, printed with floral patterns that feel oddly familiar because they are... British factories are now mass-producing copies of Indian designs and selling them back to the very cultures they borrowed from. She opens the cloth and sighs. Pretty, she admits, but the dyes bleed. You nod. Beauty at a discount. At the port of Bombay, you watch crates stamped with logos, Manchester Textiles Limited, Dutch East Indies Exports, Franco-Belgian Cotton & Co. get loaded onto ships bound for Java, Zanzibar, Havana, London. No more silk by camel, no more bolts by barge. Fabric now moves by engine. In Marseille, you tour a warehouse full of automated looms. The click-clack rhythm is hypnotic, mechanical, endless. A supervisor shows you a roll of printed muslin. Machine dyed, he says. Easier. Faster. Cheaper. You ask about the artisans? Gone, he replies, or now they sew for department stores. Fringe tidbit. The rise of ready-to-wear fashion in the 19th century led to the explosion of sizing charts, tailoring machines, and standardized patterns. Clothes were no longer just made for you. They were made about you. Fit became identity. Fabric became a product, not a craft. In London's Liberty department store, you watch wealthy shoppers glide through aisles of imported fabrics and exotic prints. One holds up a scarf with lotus flowers and cranes. Oriental, she murmurs approvingly. You flip the tag Made in Birmingham. Close enough, apparently. Historians still argue whether this was the death of craft or the birth of fashion as we know it. Either way, the Silk Road, once stitched together by hands, hooves, and hope, is now stitched by capitalism and steam. You catch a ride on a cargo steamer heading east. The deck is stacked with crates of British wool, Chinese silk, Indian cotton, and American denim. It's a floating tapestry of contradiction. In Singapore, you sip tea with a merchant who shows you batik sarongs made with synthetic dyes. We don't have time for the old ways, he says. People want 5 prints for the price of 1. He pulls out a bolt of cloth, stiff and vivid, lasts a season. Then you buy more. In Hong Kong, tailors advertise Shanghai-style suits in Western cuts. A young man picks up a 2-button blazer with hand-stitched silk lining. Imported outer, the tailor says. Inner part, my grandmother's pattern. You stop at a rail station in Samarkand, now quiet but still colorful. A little girl wearing a polka dot dress trimmed with Uzbek embroidery waves at you. The dress says England. The trim says home. By now, you notice a strange loop fabrics imitating fabrics. Cultures dressing like each other. Fashion eating its own tail. You see Japanese kimono robes made from French brocade. American denim jackets lined with Chinese silk. Indian salwar suits sewn with synthetic Scottish tartan. The Silk Road is no longer a line, it's a web. And still, people resist. You meet a weaver in Istanbul restoring ancient looms. Machine weaving is faster, he says. But it forgets. He lets you try a few passes on the shuttle. Your hands are clumsy. the pattern crooked. He nods anyway. You remember with your fingers. In a small tailor shop in Damascus, a woman stitches old Silk Road patterns into wedding dresses made from factory cloth. I can't stop the machine. She tells you, but I can stitch under it. You lie down that night on a train crossing the Caspian Plain. The rhythm of the wheels sounds almost like loom work. Almost? But not quite. You hold in your lap a small patchwork bag made from bits collected along the way. Tang silk, Abbasid brocade, Parisian buttons, Mongol wool trim, Indian cotton, Venetian lace. The thread is old. The road is changing. Tomorrow, you arrive in the modern world, where fast fashion reigns and the soul of the Silk Road still lingers. But tonight, under electric lamplight and soot-streaked stars, you ride the last leg of the old path stitched into history by motion, memory, and thread. The train slows, brakes hissing like steam-fed serpents. Outside the window, neon signs blink over glass storefronts, and traffic hums like a loom run amok. You've arrived not in a single city or empire, but in the modern world, where fashion is instant. Trends flicker and vanish overnight, and the Silk Road still whispers in the weave if you know how to listen. You step onto a cracked sidewalk next to a billboard showing a supermodel in a silk dress. Global luxury. The tagline reads, beneath it, tiny letters, imported fabric, assembled offshore. You smile grimly. Some things haven't changed, they've just been photoshopped. Mainstream historical fact. The globalization of fashion accelerated in the 20th and 21st centuries, fueled by digital commerce, synthetic textiles, and mass production. Yet traces of the Silk Road remain in motifs, techniques, terminology, and the global hunger for style that crosses borders faster than freight. You wander into a boutique where mannequins wear denim jackets embroidered with Persian calligraphy, hoodies screen-printed with Chinese dragons, and yoga pants stitched in Jaipur floral patterns. Eco-conscious, the clerk says brightly. Machine washable. Inspired by ancient cultures, 15% off. You hold a scarf labeled boho cheek tribal fusion and trace the pattern. It's a flattened version of something you once saw in a weaver's hut outside Samarkand only now. It's polyester, and it comes in 8 colors named after seasons that don't exist. In Seoul, you watch a designer live stream their runway show, where models wear digital garments superimposed over motion-captured bodies. A pixelated qipao, a glitching kimono, a translucent gown that swirls like Tang Dynasty silk but changes color with the beat of the music. In Lagos, a tailor streams his process on TikTok, hand embroidering Ghanaian kente into custom jackets with upcycled denim. He grins. The West copies us now. Took long enough. Fringe tidbit. Some fast fashion companies now intentionally mimic the look of hand-woven flaws, slight irregularities in print or thread to create the illusion of artisan-made products. The irony loops like a runaway spool. In Tokyo, you sit in a quiet shop where vintage kimonos hang beside tailored trench coats. The owner offers you green tea and gestures to a display. 19th century OB, she says, paired with Parisian wool. Harmony of opposites. You see a button that looks like the one you gave away in Istanbul. It might be. The world is smaller now. Historians still argue what the Silk Road truly meant. Trade, power, cultural fusion, exploitation. But maybe it's not about what it meant then. maybe it's about what it still does connect. A teenage girl walks by in sneakers painted with Mughal motifs. Her earbuds blast K-pop. Her backpack is embroidered with akantha. She doesn't know she's wearing centuries of history. Or maybe she does, and she's remixing it on purpose. You sit in a cafe where the menu offers Persian rose tea, Uzbek apricot cake, and Korean street toast. The waiter's apron has Sogdian script printed in blue on the pocket. He doesn't read it. He just likes the pattern. The Silk Road never ended. It just went online. It pulses in Amazon warehouses, in Etsy listings, in airport duty-free scarves, in streetwear inspired by Mongol armor, in haute couture shows with Tang collars and Berber tassels. And yes, in that shirt you're wearing. You return to your room, modern, beige, softly lit. On the chair lies the same patchwork bag you've carried since Section 1. Its colors have dulled. Its stitches are looser, but it still holds everything memory. Mistake. Miracle. You open it. Pull out a strip of cotton dyed with beetle red. A tiny wooden button. A printed cotton scrap that smells faintly of marigold. A ribbon someone told you was lucky. A silk thread you never quite remembered to sew in. You hold it all in your lap. A whole history still warm. You close your eyes. And now, as the thread reaches its final loop, your journey quiets. The wheels slow. The looms fade. And the distant hum of distant lands becomes a gentle rustle. Like fabric folding softly in the dark, you lie back. Let your shoulders sink into the pillow. Let the stitches of the story dissolve into the hush of night. The Silk Road has brought you across empires and oceans, through dust storms, dynasties, court balls, and factory floors. You've worn the robes of poets, generals, dancers, weavers, and tailors, some remembered, some forgotten, all sewn into the shared garment of time. It's strange, isn't it, that something as soft as cloth could reshape the world? That a single bolt of silk could bring cities to life, or cause a scandal in Rome? That patterns made by candlelight could survive centuries smuggled in hems, whispered through threads, sung beneath breath, and stranger still, that each stitch, each button, each tassel could carry a little of you curious. Sleepy, gentle as the hand that brushes fabric before sleep. So close your eyes. Maybe tonight you dream of Tang red or Mongol blue. Maybe you walk the bazaar again, or sit by the loom one last time. Whatever comes, let it come slowly. Let it wrap around you like cotton on skin. Let it lull you like a lullaby woven in wind. You've traveled far. You've seen much. And now, the road ends exactly where it should. Home,